now appears to be all but certain that Pete Hegseth will be confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense. Republican leaders in the Senate have said as much, and it's not hard to see why that's the case. After weeks of telling us that Hegseth is unqualified for the job, Democrats spent several hours trying and utterly failing to land a single meaningful blow against his nomination. Instead, Hegseth came across as a Christian who's very aware of his own personal past failings. He was also able to put all that into context. Under the leadership of former Raytheon board member Lloyd Austin, the Pentagon carried out political purges in the military. It oversaw a catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. It terminated thousands of soldiers who didn't want to take the experimental COVID shot. Those are colossal failings that no one in the Pentagon has ever atoned for. So Pete Hegseth is not a perfect man. Who is? But he is basically a saint compared to the people who ran the old regime. And after yesterday's hearing, no reasonable person can really deny that. So throughout the hearing, Democrats discredited themselves one after another with botched gotcha moments and non sequiturs. And the optics could not have been worse. As in particular, women in the hearing kept screaming at Hegseth, all while trying to make the argument that women are just as capable of serving in combat roles as men. Now, if there was a way to weaponize nagging so that you could literally nag your enemies to death, they may have a point. I mean, these women could create a weapon of mass nagging destruction and kill thousands of enemy combatants all at once, if that was possible. Now, before we get into that particular part of the hearing, the discussion of women in combat, it's important to set the stage with some of the many blunders that I'm referring to here. So here, for example, is Senator Gary Peters of Michigan attempting to make the point that Hegseth has no business running the Defense Department because he has never, quote, driven innovation in any organization in his life. And here's how that went.
I don't know of any corporate board of directors that would hire a CEO for a major company if they came and said, you know, I supervised 100 people before. They'd ask you, well, what kind of experiences you had? We need innovation. Can you give me an experience or your actual experience of driving innovation in an organization? Give me an example of where you have done that.
Oh my goodness, Senator, absolutely. At Concerned Veterans for America, we created the Fixing Veterans Healthcare Task Force, a bipartisan task force that had never been done before, to create policy, to drive policy change on Capitol Hill that organizations fought ferociously against. We got the VA Accountability Act passed and the Mission Act passed in a way that a nonprofit of our size, veterans organization, has never done. And that's testified in all the letters that we put forward to the committee, which are on the record.
I have limited time. Thank you for that. Give me an example of where you've driven down cost. I've heard the examples that...
Thank you. I know your answer. We don't need answers here. You misunderstand, Mr. Hegseth. We don't want you to actually answer the questions that I'm asking. These questions are not meant to be answered because they're really just statements. And obviously, in this case, he asked a question he didn't know the answer to. That's the first mistake. It's like if you're in court and you're questioning a witness, you never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. And then he made it clear that he didn't really care about the answer to the question either, and so just total humiliation was the result. But even aside from that, what's extraordinary about his question is that Lloyd Austin had exactly the kind of experience that Gary Peters is talking about. Austin was in charge of the war effort in both Iraq and Afghanistan for many years. According to Democrats in Congress, that made Austin qualified to be Secretary of Defense, even though both of those wars ended in complete disaster. So that is what box checking looks like. These people cannot comprehend the idea of hiring someone who hasn't made money in the defense industry and who has not overseen 2 failed wars. They see that as a mark against Hegseth instead of the primary reason to confirm him. Not to be outdone, there was Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island coming in hot with this takedown. Watch.
But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention, the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir.
Why not?
because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reid.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you
Reid.
very much.
Now, the implication is that Pete Hegseth is a terrible guy because he used the word jagoff in the past. Now, I think that Hegseth throwing around insults like that does open him up to the charge of, being a bit of a boomer, but I'm not sure it says anything more than that. And then when Hegseth answers the question, Jack Reed looks stunned. One might even say that he looked a bit like a jagoff. By the way, I will say that, and look, I didn't serve in the military. I know a lot of people who did serve, one thing I know is that guys who served in the military, they don't take kindly to coarse language. That's one thing about the military. You're not gonna hear any coarse language. I mean, jagoff. You go around guys in the military, use a term like jagoff, they're gonna be very offended by that. They're gonna say, "Sir, we don't use a language like that around. This is inappropriate." There's also a lot of questioning revolving around Pete Hegseth's drinking habits, and that's another one that guys in the military certainly they don't touch this stuff. Cursing, throwing down a beer or two, not something you find in the military. No, sir. No, sir. Did you know that 80% of resolutions fail by February? Well, this year could be different because I've discovered something that's transformed my approach to health. It's called Lumen, the world's first handheld metabolic coach. Here's what makes Lumen special. It measures your metabolism through your breath, showing you whether you're burning fat or carbs. Every morning I take a quick breath into my Lumen, and it gives me personalized nutrition recommendations for the day. I can even check before and after workouts to optimize my fitness routine, make sure I'm staying on track for my 2025 goals. You see, your metabolism is like your body's engine. It's central to everything from energy levels to sleep quality. What I love about Lumen is how it adapts to your body's needs. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep, etc. And look, who doesn't want that? The best part? Lumen provides clear insights and guidance to help you make informed decisions about your health. It's not about quick fixes. It's about understanding your body, making sustainable changes over time. Take the next step to improving your health. Go to lumen.me/Walsh to get 20% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Walsh for 20% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. I do want to highlight one moment of substantive discussion to the extent that anything in this hearing could be described as substantive. Several senators took turns berating Hegseth over his stance on women in the military. In particular, Hegseth says that he's generally fine with women in combat roles, but at a minimum, he wants the fitness standards to be equal across genders. Now, effectively, as I'll explain in a moment, that actually means that he doesn't want women to serve in combat roles. Now, you're not going to say it as directly as that in a hearing like this, because the whole point is that you need to be confirmed. And if Hegseth had just come out and said plainly that he doesn't want any women in combat, that would have given squishy Republicans the excuse they need to not confirm him. So you don't want to give that to them. So instead, he focused on the fitness requirements, which was strategically smart. Now, in response to his position on fitness requirements, various senators adopted the bizarre and clearly false position that the standards between men and women in the military are already the same. Watch.
As Secretary, would you take any action to reinstitute the combat arms exclusion for female service members, knowing full well you have hundreds of women doing that job right now? And the standards, your 2-mile run, Tom, is about the Army combat fitness test. It is not the requirements to have an MOS 11 Bravo, which is the infantry. These are the requirements today for people serving in the industry, men and women. They are gender neutral, and they are very difficult to meet. They have not been reduced in any way, and our combat units, our infantry is lethal.
Okay, and there was a lot of, just using one example, but this question of whether of the fitness standards was brought up by repeatedly, during this hearing, and the fundamental claim of the people on the other side of this is that the fitness standards are the same. So if Hegseth is worried about lowering standards for women, it's not happening. That's the claim. Now, before we play Hegseth's response to this line of question, it's important to point out that this claim is just not true. The standards of physical fitness across every branch of the armed forces are much lower for women than they are for men. So let's start with the fitness requirements at the Navy, and we put it up on the screen. As you can see, their physical readiness test consists of some variation of push-ups, forearm planks, a 1.5-mile run, and a 500-yard swim. So let's take the run as an example, which, by the way, the Navy refers to as a run-walk section because they expect applicants won't be able to run the full distance, or at least they don't have to. For men aged 17 to 19, a satisfactory time on the 1.5-mile run is 12 minutes and 15 seconds, which, by the way, is already way too slow. That's not satisfactory. Okay, my 10-year-old son can crush that time for a 1.5 mile. And we'll get to that in a second. For women in the same age group, a satisfactory time is 14 minutes and 45 seconds. So they get a full 2 minutes and 30 seconds extra to complete the run, which for a 1.5-mile race is an eternity. And by the way, you can technically get even worse times than this and still pass because there's a whole probationary level below satisfactory. For push-ups, the difference is even more stark. Men aged 17 to 19 have to hit 46 push-ups for a satisfactory rank. Women only need to hit 20. Meanwhile, the minimum outstanding score for men for push-ups is 86, while it's only 47 push-ups for women. If you go to the Army's website, you'll find similar numbers across their physical fitness tests. This is the sprint drag carry test, for example. It's a test that obviously has a lot of relevance to people who want to serve in the Army in case they need to carry a wounded soldier and not blame them for being wounded, as they do in the Los Angeles Fire Department, as we've seen. And as you can see, men get max points if they finish the test in 1 minute, 29 seconds. Women get max points if they finish it in 1 minute, 55 seconds. So they get an additional 26 seconds to sprint, drag, and carry someone. Just to underscore the real-world consequences of this kind of gender-based testing, here's a post from someone named Nathan Spearing, quote, "In 2005, I was 22 and had one of the top PT scores in my platoon in Ranger Battalion. One night, one of my mates was shot and completely immobilized. I worked with a small group of men to get him to the casualty evacuation point while our platoon continued the raid. Dragging him through the streets of Iraq that night felt like I'd never worked out in my life. It's one of the most physically fit men in an elite light infantry unit, and this combat-related task took me well beyond my physical capacities. Women shouldn't do these jobs ever. They can't without endangering the mission and the men around them." But the military appears to be fine with that. The Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, even Space Force have similar arrangements. Here, for example, is the Coast Guard's breakdown of fitness standards, explicitly aligned with men on top and women on the bottom. As you can see, men need to do 29 push-ups if they're under 30 years old. Women only need to do 15. Meanwhile, over in the Marines, men need to do 3 pull-ups or 34 push-ups in 2 minutes, while women only have to do 1 pull-up or 15 push-ups in the same time period. And I go on, but you get the point. I mean, there is nothing gender neutral about the fitness standards for any branch of the armed services. This is not up for debate. It can't be disputed. It's simply a fact that standards are lower for women. And that's been the case for decades. It's also a fact that the standards for men, too, have also been lowered. There's been an effort to get more women into the military and also less fit men into the military. And those two goals are obviously related to each other. Because in truth, 46 push-ups, it should not be satisfactory for a grown man who wants to join the military. For the Coast Guard, what was the number? 29? 29 push-ups? Which is downright pathetic. I mean, we should expect a lot more of the people who are tasked with defending the country from its enemies. But what Gillibrand was saying is that at the urging of Congress, certain specialties like the infantry have adopted their own independent gender-neutral standards on top of the basic requirements. But that has not been going well either. As the Army Times reported in 2022, quote, "The Army is moving forward with its long-awaited Army Combat Fitness Test this year, but the service has officially dropped the test attempt to set a gender and age-neutral physical fitness standard. The leg tuck is no longer an event. A 2.5-mile walk has been added as an alternate aerobic event for troops whose medical profiles prevent them from running. I mean, if their medical profiles prevent them from running, how are they even allowed to be in the military is a question you might ask. But, you know, a total of 48% of active duty enlisted women and 28% of active duty female officers could not pass the test. In other words, they tried to make the test gender neutral and women kept failing it. So they responded by gutting the test and making it a lot easier. And after all that, it's still not gender neutral. In his answer to Kirsten Gillibrand, Pete Hegseth attempted to make these points. He also outlined his own firsthand observation of lowered standards in the military. And Gillibrand responded by, of course, shrieking at him. Watch.
My critiques, Senator, recently and in the past, and from personal experience, have been instances where I've seen standards lowered, and you mentioned 11 Alpha, 11 Bravo, MOS, places in units, and the book that has been referenced multiple times here, The War on Warriors. I spent months talking to active duty service members, men and women, low ranks, high ranks, combat arms and not combat arms. And what each and every one of them told me, and which personal instances have shown me, is that in ways direct, indirect, overt, and subtle, standards have been changed inside infantry training units, ranger school, infantry battalions, to ensure that
Give me one example. Please give me an example. I get you're making these generalized
meet
statements.
Quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted, and that disparages those women.
Commanders do not have to meet quotas for the infantry. Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist.
So this was the theme of the hearing. Democrats demand an answer, then they get one that they don't like, so they start screaming. And look, the truth obviously is that if men and women were held to the same standard in the military, there would not be any women in the military. The way that we know that the standards are not the same for women in the military is that there are women in the military. That's how we know. We don't need to know anything else about the fit. Just show me the, if we're talking about the military and the question is, are standards lower for women? The only question I need to ask is, well, are there women in the military? Yes. Well, then the standards are lower because otherwise they wouldn't be in there. All right. Now, Pete Hegseth may not want to say that out loud at a confirmation hearing, which makes sense. He shouldn't, because the point, again, is to be confirmed. But it's the truth. Including women in the military necessitates, by definition, lowering the standard. Women cannot measure up to the same physical standard as men. So if you set the physical standard for men to something reasonably challenging, there would be almost zero women in the country who could make it, okay? And that's exactly why I say we should raise the standard for everyone, make it the same for everyone, and then let the chips fall where they may. Okay? I mean, it's not just about like push-ups, but let's start with that. But pick a number for push-ups. 29 is not enough. I don't know. You should be able to do what's a good starting point, satisfactory for a man who wants to join the military. How many push-ups should you be able to do? 60 at least. So let's say you set it there. All right. How many women could do 60 push-ups? In the entire country, in the whole country, there's how many adult women are in the country? 100 plus million. How many of them could do 60 push-ups? Almost zero. Almost zero. And so that alone, and then before you even get into any of the other physical fitness tests. So set it to a reasonably challenging standard and let the chips fall where they may. And they're going to fall on an all-male fighting force, which is how it should be anyway. Of course, even aside from the fact that women can't do the job as well as men can when it comes to combat, they also just shouldn't be serving in combat anyway. A functional society does not send women out to die on the battlefield. They're not equipped for it, physically or psychologically. It's not what women are meant to do. But our government has been denying this basic fact for years. A decade ago, when the defense secretary at the time opened up all combat roles to women, he said, quote, They'll be allowed to drive tanks, fire mortars, and lead infantry soldiers into combat. And it made that sound like it was a sign of great progress, but it's a sign of decay, not progress. It's also a sign that we're going to lose the next major war we're a part of unless we turn back from this madness. And after yesterday's confirmation hearing, finally, it seems like we'll have a defense secretary who understands that. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.